The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
Today on the Workbench, an interview with Matt Berggren from Autodesk. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Workbench. I'm your host, George, KJ6VU.
And I'm Jeremy, KF7IJZ.
The Workbench is sponsored by CADsoft, makers of Eagle PCB design tools. Get your free copy at cadsoft.io. And by MCM Electronics, where I can and you can buy all of your electronic parts needs and equipment. Check out mcmelectronics.com today.
Welcome to episode 7 of the Workbench. If this is your first time here, we're glad to have you. And there's plenty of content for you to catch up on available at hamradio360.com or in your iTunes feed. I'm your host, Jeremy, KF7IJZ.
And I'm George, KJ6VU.
So, George, tonight's episode is just a little bit different than the previous 6 episodes.
Yeah, today we have an interview with Matt Berggren. And Matt is at Autodesk, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard of Autodesk because they're the folks that make AutoCAD, but they also make tons of other software. And the interview with Matt is all about electronics design and how that's going to be changing and the impact of the maker and hobbyist community on the commercial electronics design. So it's kind of a different topic, but it's very much in the DIY, make-it-yourself, hands-on kind of spirit.
And part of the reason that we were able to get time with Matt is because Matt is one of our sponsors.
Yeah, so really in full disclosure here, so when we started the Workbench, we were looking for a sponsor that we thought would be a good fit, and we had a couple in mind. And one of those companies is CADsoft, and CADsoft makes the Eagle, as you guys know. And the funny thing is, after we started working with them as a sponsor, CADsoft was acquired by Autodesk. So when that happened, of course, we're thinking, wow, what does that mean? Not that we're the most important thing on their radar, but what does this mean for us? You know, are they going to want to support this? This is a corporate acquisition of another business, and what's going to happen? And we had the opportunity to meet Matt, who is the guy in charge, and he was the fellow at Autodesk that pursued the acquisition of CADsoft. And it turns out that Matt's a really cool guy, and he's very much a maker, hands-on, hobbyist, do-it-yourselfer kind of guy, not only personally, but in his career. And he's not a ham, but he's pretty close to being a ham. He's got a lot of ham relatives. So it's actually a really good fit, and we're just really happy that they see a lot of value in working with us, so that's great.
And one of the cool things about Matt is that he's not just, some corporate suit. I mean, the spirit of creating and DIY and making that is alive and well in amateur radio is very much a part of who he is. He's also, if I'm not mistaken, isn't he active with the Hackaday guys?
Yes, he is. So before he went to Autodesk, a while ago, he was with Altium. Altium is another PCB tool, so he's with that company for a long time. And then he went to SupplyFrame, and SupplyFrame is connected to a lot of the online sort of maker communities. SupplyFrame owns the Hackaday website. That's one of their online properties, yeah.
Cool. And if for those of you not familiar with who Autodesk is as a company, Autodesk is one of the most well-known 3D design and CAD companies in the world. I remember having an opportunity to first touch Autodesk design software many, many, many years ago. And what's cool about them is they have really come out with a lot of, I'll say slightly, I don't want to say revolutionary because that sounds like hyperbole, but they've come out with a lot of design applications for a lot of different needs. For 3D design or a practice called photogrammetry, where you can take 1 million pictures of something and have a computer build a 3D model. And they've published software that is usable at all levels. They have things that are very easy that you can build a model from a library of parts all the way through fully designed material-based software. And what's really awesome about their approach here in the last several years is they have been very supportive of the maker community They have an application called Fusion 360, which is a complete 3D design, modeling, material design application. It can also actually directly print to a 3D printer. It is my design or piece of design software of choice because I can design in 2D, then move as far as similar to drawing the different oblique views and whatnot of an object, and then you can move into 3D and extract things and extrude things and get your shape right, and then I can take that and move it right into my printer. What's really cool about this is this software is insanely powerful and the same caliber of stuff you would use as a professional, but they let me use it for free because I'm a maker. And that's that's really a huge mindset shift for a lot of these big companies that, for a while, several companies were releasing crippled versions of their big applications and giving those away for free. But Autodesk has made these tools available and several others to this community for non-commercial purposes. So as a tinkerer, I was able to sit there and bang out a design for a Raspberry Pi cluster frame one night, which was awesome.
So that whole idea is very much part of the discussion in the interview that you'll hear about, and it is an interesting shift because in the past you really had these big companies building commercial software for industrial customers, and they still do, obviously, but there's this crossover into education that you would expect. But now there's really this hobbyist crossover, and there's quite a blurring of those lines, and the motivation behind it. I think there's a couple of fundamental reasons why they do it. One is that a lot of people who are professional engineers also tinker in their spare time. And why did a lot of software companies give away software to universities? And it's because they want to seed their future customers, of course. So why not do the same thing in the maker community? And it's a smart thing from a business perspective, but it means that for those of us who want to dabble with that kind of technology, we have some pretty incredible stuff at our fingertips.
And that's one of the things, CADsoft has their and I forget, I don't know if they call it the Maker Edition. George, please correct me. But just like them, I mean, they give you, an entry-level set of tools that as a maker that you're able to do some productive work. And again, the free version of the application is what the Intent Analyzer project was designed on.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, let me spill the beans on a little thing that Matt did after he got involved with with CADsoft. So the free version of Eagle was a 2-layer version of the product, meaning you could lay out a circuit board with traces on the top and traces on the bottom. And it was constrained by the size of the board. So after Matt came on board, they revamped the products a little bit. And now the free version of Eagle will let you do 6 layers, not 2 layers.
Wow.
And I said, oh, that's great. That, why'd you do that? And I was surprised what the answer was. He said, because you can't do an RF board with 2 layers. You have to have power and ground, and you need ground fill, and you need at least 4 layers to do an RF board. And I thought, oh, that's awesome.
That is awesome.
Because, that's the kind of need that a ham radio hobbyist would have if you're doing an RF circuit. So I was pretty impressed with that thought. So anyway, we'll get to the interview with Matt shortly here, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
So in the meantime, a few things newsy, and of course, this is I'm mainly going to talk about a bunch of different product stuff. First of all, I'm going to start with outrage.
What are you outraged about today? All right.
So as we have mentioned previously, the ICOM ID51A Plus 2. A 5-watt dual band HT that is technically, I think, the 4th generation of the ID51 platform. The thing that's notable about this is they have created some software and presumably done something to the radio that now, in addition to being a D-Star, an analog 2-meter 440 radio with, its most notable features are there's a GPS built in. You can load a repeater directory into it and use GPS to find repeaters. But in this most recent version, they've added 2 features. One where you can plug it in via a cable, which is included with the radio, either to an Android tablet or into a PC, and then you can use the radio as a D-Star hotspot or access point. So very similar to the Internet Labs DVAP, where you're basically using it as a gateway onto the D-Star network, or if you don't have another D-Star radio to talk through, you're actually going to be able to pick this radio up and without using RF, key the radio up and using software on your computer or your Android device, get onto the D-Star network that way, where it is all completely digital and there is no RF involved at all. And that's very similar to the Internet Labs DV dongle. Several other companies have dongles and these hotspots. But here's where the outrage comes in. Are you ready?
Yeah, lay it on me.
So I've been trying to track pricing for this, and I came across a listing for the radio at HRO, $550.
Ooh.
Now, why is this outrageous? Well, number one is that if you go to MTC Radio right now, for $240, you can buy the second generation of this radio, also known as the Anniversary Edition. And it does everything that the Plus 2 does except for that access point and that dongle mode. The reason it's outrageous is because you can get your own dongle with software for free for $99. Northwest Digital makes one. I'm pretty sure the DV Mini guys have a dongle. There are several other like Ambi 3000 dongles out there for $100 there, give or take. And for the access points, you can go as expensive as spending $250-ish for the DVAP. Or I think the DV4 Mini is actually available now for like $99. I don't quote me on that, and put links in, of course. And that actually gives you the ability to have a hotspot for D-Star, DMR, P25, and System Fusion. So for $350 all in, or if you want to have both, $450, you can reproduce this. Now, maybe the being able to run it off an Android tablet is a differentiator, although I have seen some people port software onto Android devices. Actually, if I remember correctly, Robin Cutshaw from Internet Labs actually at one point I think had promised his client software available on Android. I don't know that ever happened. I can't say one way or another. But $550 and no upgrade path for somebody who has already bought one of the other radios.
Actually, I got to add to your outrage.
Well, I'm not done.
Oh, you're not. Well, okay.
Well,
keep going.
It's not outrage. It's detail. One other thing to point out about this is, so I mentioned that this was the fourth iteration of this radio. The very first iteration was just the ID51. They released the Anniversary Edition and then the Plus Edition, which functionally are identical. More recently, they have released a new version that is a new set of colors. This radio is available with different colors. In the most recent set, there are 5 different colors like orange and neon pink and neon yellow and whatnot. But functionally an identical radio. That radio is selling for about $409. And to get the cable, there's an Android app available for these radios that you can transmit pictures and do text messages and things on. The app is free, but the cabling you need to hook to the radio is about $60. And of course, that cable will be included with the new radio. But that's still not $550. And I don't have one. I can't open it up. I don't know if there's a hardware difference or not. George, you've tried to calm me down in this topic saying, well, maybe there's a faster processor, maybe there's more memory in the radio. Who knows? But $550 premium when I can still buy the radio that does 90% of what the other one is for $250.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a miss. If I were the ICOM folks, I think I would have priced it at $399, which is the old list price of the 51, and say, well, it's the new version and it's got these new features. And as the older stock is sold off at a lower price, that's fine. And then you're left with the $400 top of the line one. Because like you said, the alternatives are pretty price competitive. And I would add one more piece of outrage to your list. So you mentioned you're comparing getting the new radio versus the old radio and a DVAP. If you got the old radio in a DVAP, it's really 2 radios. It's your radio in your hand, and it's the little radio in the DVAP. If you buy the Plus 2 model, that's only one end of that path. So while that one radio will work as a dongle, you need a second radio to make it work as a DVAP.
Yep, that's a very good point, which you can buy the new $650 Kenwood and talk to the new $550 ICOM. There you go. The sad thing about this is okay, I personally have outrage about this, and outrage is, I'm all joking aside. I mean, I paid, when the 51 first came out, I think I paid $600 for it, and then when the 51 anniversary edition came out, I paid another $600 for that. I traded in my original 51 towards it. Now, the killer feature that was added between those two, and I think this was in response to System Fusion, which had a faster data mode than just the 1200 baud that we're all accustomed to on the quote-unquote data channel in the D-Star stream, is they created what they call fast data, which allowed you to use the full bandwidth of the payload in the packet stream, which gave you 3840 baud, if I remember correctly, because you're using the full voice bandwidth as well as that extra 1200 baud. So it's medium speed. And the only reason I say that is because technically high speed D-Star is the stuff in the 1.2 gig where you can get 128 kilobit up and down. So that feature carries on. But I think 450 would have been a great price for this. And it's interesting because the anniversary edition is still selling so cheap just because they're trying to get rid of stock. I know Gerald bought one at the MENA Hamfest 2 weekends ago. So I don't know how much longer they're going to be around. Another advantage of the anniversary edition over the other ones is it comes with 2 antennas, the normal standard rubber ducky, and then a nicer, little bit higher gain antenna, which I actually use for one of my desktop scanners. It looks very nice.
So let me balance your outrage for a second here. So for those of you who are thinking about D-Star but haven't taken the plunge, the flip side of this is the positive version is the current 51, like Jeremy you were just saying, at $239 for the radio is a swinging good price for that radio, for any radio of its caliber, D-Star or not. It's a very good radio, and at $239, that's a deal. And if you add a DVAP for somewhere between $100 to $270, depending on the brand that you get, for a total cost of $500, you have a fantastic system. I think that's a great setup. In fact, if I had no D-Star at all, and the choice was to buy the new one at $550 or a DVAP and a current model ID51, I'd go for the latter. I'd go for the current ID51 and DVAP, and I'd be super happy with that.
Yeah, I would agree. And the thing is, I definitely, the radio is an incredibly nice radio. The fact that there's one limitation with it that frustrates me, but all amateur radio manufacturers seem to be doing this, where the radio for some reason could only load like 1,000 memories. And so with the repeater list you can download that include both analog and D-Star repeaters, like for instance, I have mine set up for the greater metro area, plus or minus a 2-hour drive in every direction. And considering the radio actually has a micro SD card slot and that it's 2016 and memory is cheap, I would really hope that it would have been nice if I could have loaded all of North America into the radio and let the GPS do the work. Because, I mean, truthfully, having a radio that has a GPS that roughly knows that you are close to analog repeaters it's a killer feature. I mean, that is like evolution of amateur radio. You can kind of get around this by loading different regions worth of files on the micro SD card. And if you change regions, you can then load a different, 1,000 memory list into the radio. So, I mean, technically you can work around it, but there's, in my opinion, still no reason why you couldn't load all the repeaters. And then the thing is nobody else makes a radio that will do analog repeater GPS finding. I mean, there are some other applications and stuff that can tune a radio if it's connected, but that's really nice. It has built-in voice recording, and it is, to me, an incredibly easy to use radio and very easy to get on D-Star.
So let's just rewind and say what you just said in slow speed for a second. And I don't know if everybody really understands what you just said. That's very cool.
The radio is good.
The slow shorthand version, I pull out the handy talkie. I press a button that says find local repeaters, and I could pick FM or D-Star or both. And I press a button, and it loads them into gives me a list, and I scroll down the list and I select the repeater I want, and the radio is programmed. And that is an awesome feature.
Yeah, and that's what they call their DR mode. And the DR mode was introduced in previous generation radios, but say, for instance, in the 880, you had to go in and build the D-Star repeater list yourself. And it only worked with D-Star because those DR functions were related on having the 4 call signs that D-Star requires. With the plus model or the anniversary model of the radio, that was the other killer feature. Or in addition to having the fast data mode, they also allowed you to do it with analog repeaters. So it is pretty cool if you're new to amateur radio or new to D-Star that you literally press the DR button for 2 seconds and you say, find repeaters near me. And then you tell it analog, digital, or both. And then you're off to the races. And pretty much you never actually have to manually program anything as long as you keep those repeater lists up to date. And there are a myriad of ways.
We've had a bunch of folks in our local club interested in getting on D-Star, especially with the low price of the radio, and a lot of us talking up being on D-Star. And some of the new guys to D-Star were pretty confused by the ease of use feature enhancements of DR mode. So DR mode was put in the radios to make it easier to figure out how to use the digital radio. And personally, I think it made it more confusing, and I was pretty confused for a while. So I spent some time with Rich, KC6OBJ, who's our D-Star guru in the group, and he taught me how it works. And once you get it explained to you, it's actually very easy. But at first, it's rather intimidating. So we're going to do a training class here in the next couple of weeks sometime, and we'll be putting together a slide deck. And if anybody wants to get a copy of that, we'll make that available.
Oh, that's nice. So it is dstarinfo.com. So I was right.
Well, you're always right.
Well, no, but I will. I'll put a link in the show note. Now, and just for full disclosure, I don't know how, but I am going to wind up both with the Kenwood and the Icom Plus 2. I mean, it may wait till Dayton, and I'm sure by Dayton the price of those radios will go down by at least $50. But
yeah, there's a deal.
Well, any saved money is good, right?
Yeah, that's true. I can tell you've got your eye on the Kenwood. Are you tracking its availability? Are you calling HRO every day to see if they're in stock yet?
No, because you can track that online. Plus, I would call Richard at MTC first. Honestly, like the reason I haven't been paying attention to it is because the ham inside me and the gadget freak inside me wants it. And when I was in DC, I had more disposable income, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go and buy a new radio. And usually I would trade some old stuff in at HRO or sell it or whatnot. This time, I don't really have any radios that I want to get rid of, because if I were to buy any of these, especially that Plus 2, I already have another D-Star radio. So, and like you said, you need 2 of them to get the full use out of it.
Yeah.
So, but since we brought up the Kenwood THD 74, going on to the Kenwood, as we mentioned, the price is going to be $650. I talked a little bit about, thought that $599 was probably the sweet spot, but okay. I feel a little bit better about the price, sort of, after this week, because this week I have found that Kenwood has released the English manuals online for download, and I spent some time pouring through it. And honestly, the first question that I really wanted answered was, does that DR function on the Kenwood work with analog repeaters the way it does on the ICOM? And the answer seems to be no.
Oh, no kidding.
No. And to be honest with you, there was a part of me that was, and this is pure speculation, but I was wondering if there was, some conversations between Kenwood and ICOM that said, hey, we have these features in the ICOM radio, don't duplicate them, competitive, blah, blah, blah. And as I kept going through, there were some other keynote features that I was looking at that I was not expecting the Kenwood to have, but it does. And the first of which is that fast data mode that I was referring to. The Kenwood does have that fast data mode. So it's compatible with the 5100 and the 51 Anniversary Plus and Plus 2 that are able to communicate at that 3840 baud, which that is cool. But then the Kenwood literally has everything in the kitchen sink in it. Full APRS with full KISS TNC support, not just a watered down APRS mode like Yaesu has provided with their radios that do quote unquote APRS. Built-in micro SD card, which can do QSO recording, which is a feature that actually is, it sounds silly, but I'm getting ready to use it for our club because there is somebody who is they have Vox turned on in their radio, and they're getting into arguments. And we want to record that and try to figure out who it is so we can tell them to turn Vox off, and leaving the radio run all day to make recordings is helpful. It has built-in Bluetooth, which is awesome. You can have a little headset and still be able to play radio, which is something I don't remember if any other HTs do that, but that's also, I mean, that's pretty cool. And as I understand it, I think you're even going to be able to program the radio over the Bluetooth using a serial profile as well. It has an HF receiver in it, and the HF receiver actually has filtering, DSP filtering. So there is for sideband, CW, and AM. There are different preset filter widths that you can choose, which is something that was always lacking on the TH6. While it did HF, it didn't have that built-in filtering, so that's really cool. The screen is beautiful, and I'm trying to think if there were any other big keynote features worth mentioning. You get an awful lot of radio. I mean, it really does a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. By the way, is that Bluetooth built in, or is that an option?
No, that's built in. Comes with the radio.
Because some of the radios that are out there with Bluetooth, like you can get the 5100 mobile with the Bluetooth, but that's like $100 to add that.
Yeah, just like I have a Yaesu FTM 350, which I put a Bluetooth option in the car, and like you said, it was an option.
Mm-hmm.
So, very exciting time, because we are starting to see, I hate to say this, but it's the fact, it's truth. We're starting to see modern technology wind up in our radios, which is awesome. There's one more radio. I almost said eventually we're going to see smartphone-like functionality in our radio, but there actually is a radio about to come out that does that.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to mention that.
Yeah, I
that was
completely
cool.
forgot about it until just now. So I almost said eventually we're going to see HTs that look like smartphones, but I forgot. That's actually about to happen on the 30th of this month.
And what's it going to look like?
So there's a company called RFinder, which is a repeater finder. These guys, if I remember correctly, are now like the official repeater source for the ARRL. At least their app, like their repeater finder app, is the official one. I don't remember the cost of the service that I think you pay annually or biannually, something like that. But I received an email from them because I used to be a subscriber, that says introducing the RFinder H1 Hotel 1, coming soon, release date September 30th, 2016. And it literally looks like somebody took an Android cell phone and wrapped a radio around it. There is a touchscreen display, and I've seen a video of this, and of course we'll link to everything in the show notes. I've seen a video, and the display looks remarkably good. It is not a cheap, like, we're used to seeing inexpensive Android devices where the screen, if you turn it 1 degree in any direction, the colors fade. Screen looked really good. It has 2 knobs on the top with the antenna connector and buttons on each side, or at least on one side. And looks like the battery, I can't comment. I can't tell if it's built in or if it is a replaceable battery, but there are 4 contact charging ports, charging contact tabs, so presumably there will be a cradle for this thing. And it seems like the whole shtick behind this is that it will have all of the DMR and FM repeaters, presumably 440, although I'm trying to get information about that as I'm talking. But yeah, I mean, it's going to have everything built into it, and there will be software that you will basically update and get the latest repeater list, similar to the way that Uniden and Whistler do for their scanners. And it's literally, you scroll through the list, you tap on it, and it tunes it. There are a lot of things I don't know. I don't know if it has. Here are some specs. It says 432 megahertz, so it is a 440 radio, FM DMR, and then it says GSM 4G LTE. So maybe you can put a SIM card in it and actually use it as a cell phone.
That was going to be my question: is if they would have made it into an actual phone while they're at it.
I mean, it really does look like a phone was installed in a radio case. So that's not surprising. I don't have any more information about it. According to this, it's going to be on sale in 5 days, 19 hours, 10 minutes, and 0 seconds. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and report back once we know more. Like I said, I'll put a link to it. I think I found 3 videos on YouTube where they're kind of demoing it. But that's really cool. I know I have run into in the past Chinese devices that were Android devices that also had like a VHF or a UHF radio built into them. Never have found a single person in the States who had bothered to bring one in, because I don't know if they were set up for English or if they were set up for Chinese. And this looks like this could have been one of those devices, but it looks nice. And the website I'm on is androiddmr.com.
Yeah, well, that'll be pretty cool to see. I hope it's good. There's no pricing yet, is there?
No, and like I said, there's not even, there's not even really a list of features on this thing. So it looks really interesting, and hopefully it's not vaporware. I think most people, if they know they're not going to make their release dates, don't wait till their release date to tell you that. So that's encouraging. But yeah, this thing looks cool. And if nothing else, it's really nice to see people using modern mobile technology for amateur mobile purposes.
Well, that'll be a lot of fun to check out. So isn't RF Finder one of the online repeater directories?
Yes, yeah, they're an online directory. Plus, they have cell phone apps, which that's how I used to use them as a cell phone app.
That's what I thought the name was familiar.
And like I said, if I remember correctly, they are the quote unquote official. They are the official repeater app of the ARRL now.
Ah, okay, that's where I heard it. All right, very good. Well, we'll look forward to checking that out. I know at least 3 handy talkies that'll be in the new herd over at the KF7 IJZ QTH.
Actually,
in the coming months.
Truthfully, I probably wouldn't buy. I probably wouldn't buy this one.
Oh, you say that now.
I mean, it would be nice to get my hands on one to do a video on. But it's cool. But I'm comfortable programming radios, and I'm on DMR for $110. And in fact, actually, I was using that HT earlier on FM analog, and and the code plugs are set. I'm good. I mean, it's not like there aren't DMR repeaters springing up every 5 minutes around here. So, and I will admit there is a bit of a learning curve in getting a radio set up for DMR when you're new. And so I can definitely see the benefit of this radio. If it has GPS built into it and it has that full directory loaded into it, it definitely would be a cool radio to have when you're traveling, because it's all point and touch. Well, I guess point and point. You don't have to like plug anything into your computer. You don't have to, set up the repeater inputs and outputs and all that stuff. So, I mean, it is a super cool idea, and definitely a great application of taking a modern mobile device and applying it to amateur radio. The more important thing is I think this is really just a sign of the things to come.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. The opportunity to converge, to use an overly used term, the convergence of the different technologies, there's a lot of interesting opportunities. And it's really fun to see someone actually try to do that. I mean, it's one thing to sit around and say, well, wouldn't it be great if someone took this and that and put it together? But to see somebody actually doing it is pretty cool.
Yes, it is. So by the time this episode airs, it'll be too late, but I want to call attention to it because it's something we should look into for next year. So, by the time you're listening to this, we will have just passed the weekend of September 23rd through the 25th. But this weekend, for us, it's still the future. Or actually, I guess starts today, is the D-Star QSO Party 2016.
Are you participating?
I don't know. I have to go to a wedding out of town. I don't know if there's even going to be a D-Star repeater near. This is one of those things that every single year I'm interested in the concept, but I don't even know how you operate on it. I don't know. I don't know what the rules are. So I'm going to include a link in the show notes to it and to learn a little bit more about it. And I think next year we should be better prepared and actually find out what this thing is and how you operate in it. I have a friend from my old club who has done this for a couple of years, and he's actually won pretty nice prizes.
So I don't know about the prizes or all the rules, but I actually made a QSO in the QSO party today.
Oh, did you?
I did. I was driving to work, and I've got about a 45-minute commute. And
you only live 5 miles from where you work.
Welcome to Silicon Valley. So I'm driving to work, and the repeater lights up, and a guy signs his call, and he was Oscar Echo 1 something something something. And he was from Austria. And so he shows up on the repeater and says, CQ D-Star contest, looking for a contact. So I come back to him and I said, look, I have no idea what the exchange is, but here I am. And he said, I just need a signal report and the year that you started operating D-Star. So the signal report's pretty easy because it's a voice over IP connection. So how bad could it be? So, 5.9 there, old man. And then the year I started playing with D-Star, I figured was about 2010. So 2010. And that just turned into a really pleasant QSO with Andy. And it was a lot of fun. So that's the exchange. And anything beyond that, I have no idea. Our repeater is normally connected to Reflector 14C, which is a hub for a lot of the Northern California repeaters. So usually there's 5 or 6 repeaters tied together. So he actually connected to Reflector 14C, and he called, and I came back to him, and he got his point or whatever he gets out of that. So
cool.
There you go.
So yeah, that. Sorry to tell you about something that happened in the past, but I think it was worth mentioning, and we'll be better prepared next year, hopefully. So I'll set a reminder that we said this. I think that's about it for news. Am I missing anything?
I think that's it.
Okay.
So before we start the interview with Matt, quick check-in. What's on your Workbench now?
So a few different things. Starting with most recently, I guess it was about last weekend, I finally have published my final results of my BioNO battery comparison. As a reminder to folks, I compared a BioNO 8 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery against a A123 Systems, which is now branded as NEC, 4.6 to 5 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery, and then a brand new 9 amp hour AGM sealed lead acid battery, which I had bought to rebuild a UPS with. And I conducted a series of 5 different discharge tests, 3 constant current, and then 2 duty cycle tests that would simulate operating conditions for QRP radios and for QRO radios, but turn the power down only 40, 50 watts. And I published all of my data. And as we mentioned last time, if you're going to be at Pacificon, George will be lovingly sharing my data with the crowd, and have gotten a lot of good conversation and response out of the video. So it was really good to get that thing shipped. The Cliff's Notes is that I highly, highly, highly recommend the BioNO Power Battery. And to be clear, they sent it to me because I asked them to. We met them at Dayton. And I was really curious because this is a company that people had asked me about several times, but I had no direct experience with their products. So I didn't want to make a recommendation. I said, hey, I'm really interested in comparing your battery. I'm set up to do this. Here's what I have. But I'm going to be honest in my review, so if your battery says it's 8 amp hours, but it's 2 amp hours, I'm going to be reporting the truth. So they sent me their battery and the charger, and I put it through its paces, and it came out swimmingly. And the most important thing to me is the battery by itself for 8 amp hours, which I was getting between 7.2 and like 7. I don't remember the higher value, but not quite 8, but still over 7. But the battery is $95. Even cheaper if you get them at Dayton. And Kevin from BioNO did tell me they're going to be at Pacificon as well. So hopefully after George's talk, there will be a groundswell to go check their stuff out, because it is really impressive.
That sounds really cool. By the way, I wanted to tell you, I went to the Livermore Amateur Radio Club this last weekend and did my dry run of that presentation, and I did share some of your battery data, and everybody was very interested in that. So that was super. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, send them to the link of my video, please, which I will also put in the show notes.
Will do.
2 other updates. As I mentioned, I left a soldering iron on for 2.5 weeks, and of course was in the market for a new soldering iron. I was going to buy the $270 Hako, which has the automatic power turn off, but then I decided to be more frugal, which I'm going to need the money when I end up buying the $650 Kenwood. I looked into the power unit itself, the main body seems fine. So I looked into replacing the pencil, and I contacted Hako, and I was like, hey, I just want to replace the pencil. And they're like, oh, here's the link. So the soldering iron is $100. The pencil was $78. So I am going to just upgrade to the FX888D. And then as I don't remember if we mentioned this on the show or not, but we may actually turn building a solution for automatically turning your soldering iron off as an on-show project. Probably not a kit, but certainly something that is a useful thing to have, and also a great topic to show different mindsets about problem solving around. And then lastly, there is, for the first time in my life, and it's good that we're going to be talking about CADSoft and Eagle and all that tonight, is I actually, for the first time in my life, now have an interest in maybe designing a board.
You do? For what?
Well, I was doing some research recently on solar charge controllers, and my preferred brand is a company called Jennison. The guy who runs the company is actually a ham. The reason I love them is that they're affordable and they are RF quiet, and they're also maximum power point tracking. And so I started thinking to myself, I was like, well, what's actually involved in building one of these? And like everything else in the year 2016, as it turns out, there are companies that just make chips that do it. And these companies give you a reference design and tell you what to do. So Linear Technologies makes a chip called the LT3652. And this is basically a 2 amp solar charge controller. What is SOIC? Is that System on Integrated Circuit?
No, SOIC refers to the package geometry.
Oh,
it's oh gosh, I forget what it stands for, but that's
it's
as
tiny.
Opposed to it's yeah.
So they make several different package sizes. I actually found a video of a guy in the Netherlands who made a project board around this chip, and he was able to solder them, basically doing reflow in a toaster oven. So they do make a package that is workable by a normal human being, but difficult. But I think I might use it as an example with their reference design just to try to play around with the tools. And if something comes of it, great. And if not, I can at least say I tried.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And a lot of times the reference designs are perfectly fine as working units. Well, of course, that's the whole point. But they're not like, well, here's most of what you need. Usually they're pretty complete. And I just looked it up, by the way. SOIC is Small Outline Integrated Circuit. So it's kind of a skinny surface mount package.
Yeah, and that's the key, is that unfortunately, there are no through-hole versions of this chip. They're all surface mount. But the circuit looks relatively simple. I think there's less than 20 components total. Some of the features of this thing, like whether you set it up for lead chemistry or lithium chemistries, are adjustable by changing out resistor values. And there are a few settings on this thing where there's an opportunity for me to try to design, like, well, okay, what if I want a switch that says lithium versus lead, et cetera. So I might try to start playing with that, because I think it would be a cool little project. And a 2 amp solar charge controller is perfect to mate with like a 20 or 30 watt portable solar panel, and is perfect for a QRPer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I know where you can get some software to make the board.
Yeah, really. What's on your workbench?
Oh gosh. There's always some stuff on the workbench. There's really two things I'm playing around with. One is I've got some projects that were developed for a PIC microcontroller, and I'm toying with the idea of porting the code over to Arduino and just seeing what it takes to replicate all the functions as kind of an educational project for myself. The other thing I'm doing is I'm starting to tinker around with a project that would use TNCs, and we might bring that up as a future episode topic. And by TNC, I mean terminal node controllers for packet radio. And these things have been around for 25 years or more. And one of the newer applications of that is things like telemetry data from balloons, you hear a lot about, or APRS, automated packet reporting system, for a variety of different kind of situational awareness transmissions and data transmissions. So anyway, I haven't really played with that stuff all that much. APRS a little bit, but not good old-fashioned packet. And I really have never had an application, because most people use it for position reporting, and I could really kind of care less about that. But one thing that I'm looking at is our repeater sites have a lot of equipment at them, and we monitor the health of the equipment. And we are lucky enough to have an internet connection at the repeater sites. And I was thinking that someday that internet connection might go out, and I might want to be able to still remotely monitor what's happening in the equipment rack. So I'm thinking about using a TNC for that. So we'll kind of see where that goes. That's what's on either on the bench or in the thinking process.
The workbench of the mind.
Yes, that sounds very very fancy, doesn't it?
Well, before we move on to our interview, remember that if you are interested in buying some gear or tools or components, equipment, parts, boards like Raspberry Pis and Arduinos, or if you're like me and you left your soldering iron on for 2.5 weeks and you're in the market for a new soldering iron, don't forget to check out our sponsor MCM Electronics at www.mcmelectronics.com. And if you remember the code radio5, you can save 5% on checkout on almost everything they carry. They actually are just releasing a preview of a big sale they're going to be having in October, and I will be ordering a new soldering iron from them. And I'm thinking about taking your suggestion about giving away the carbonized soldering pencil as a prize to our listeners.
Stuck into a plaque or a chunk of wood.
Yes, like I mount it to a nice piece of walnut and I'm going to label it cautionary tale.
Sounds great. We'll be right back after this.
The Workbench is sponsored by our friends at CADsoft. You know, they're the makers of the Eagle PCB design software, the very software George used to design the Pactena Classic, Pactena Mini, what him and Barrick are using to create this new antenna analyzer project for you here on the Workbench. You know, they got hundreds of parts libraries, tons of reference designs, and a monster huge user community. Eagle's a great choice for your next ham radio project, and you can get your free copy of their software today. Click on over to cadsoft.io and start getting your project put together today.
So today's guest on the Workbench is Matt Berggren, and Matt is with Autodesk. And it's very important for us to understand what's happening with Autodesk. And the reason is that our main sponsor, Eagle, made by CADsoft, started out as our first key sponsor. And shortly after we started the Workbench podcast, CADsoft was purchased by Autodesk. So today we have a really great opportunity to meet with Matt, understand a bit about what Autodesk is thinking and how Eagle fits into that whole flow. So with that, welcome to the Workbench, Matt.
Hey, thank you.
It's great to have you on. And let's start out by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do there at Autodesk.
So my role at Autodesk is really responsible for the sort of hacker-maker portfolio amongst a whole variety of other things. But I look after tools such as Tinkercad, which is designed for mechanical design and is really intended to make it easy to do mechanical design for people who might be relatively new to that space. I'm responsible for the 123D collection of products, which there's 123D Design, which is the mechanical modeler, 123D Catch, which is a 3D capture application that allows you to take photographs with a mobile phone and stitch them together to create a 3D model out of things, 123D Make, which is a large format slicer. And then I'm also responsible for the circuit design tools at Autodesk. So Autodesk has a whole collection of circuit design software that some of which was acquired through the acquisition of circuits.io, and now most recently with the acquisition of Eagle. So Eagle, Circuits.io, 123D products, Tinkercad, they kind of all roll up into me.
So some of those are really intended for a commercial user, and some of those are more intended for the maker hobbyist world. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think, so I sort of segment the world into kind of three buckets. You've got the sort of maker bucket, then the hacker bucket, which is sort of more your prosumer, your startups, your people, sort of cross-discipline engineering or scientist folks. So your mechanical engineer trying to build electronics, or your electrical engineer trying to build mechanics, or your chemical engineer trying to build something that can, sense certain chemistry. So then there's certainly the pro bucket, And historically, I think Eagle has really straddled kind of two worlds. And with the addition of Eagle, that certainly does bring my product portfolio much, much closer to the professional world, rather. However, I would say that curiously enough, when we look at the users of something like a Tinkercad, there's quite a few more professionals in the Tinkercad world than what some people might actually assume.
I'm not really surprised. When you look at even our own little ham radio world, I know a lot of hams who don't do any electronics professionally at all. It's purely a hobby for them. They're plumbers and doctors, and they do other things. But there's a lot of hams who are professional engineers, who are maybe RF engineers or analog or digital designers or other kinds of engineers. And so there's really, it seems like there's a lot of crossover where, guys might use some of the software for a professional project and maybe use it for their own personal use. It's really kind of a mix these days.
For sure. And I think it's, curiously, it's that sort of spit, glue, and tape that. So I grew up in a ham house, right? So my dad was a ham, my grandfather was a ham. All of my uncles and various folks around the family were hams of some sort. So, this is a world that is very, very near and dear to my heart. And I grew up in a house full of people that were building radios that, let's face it, they didn't look like radios, right? They didn't look like sophisticated RF systems or microwave systems or whatnot. And, as a professional engineer, like throughout my career, I ended up building a lot of wireless systems, and I got into a lot of RF electronics, focused very heavily on sort of high-frequency wireless communications. And, it's curious how the foundations for so much of what makes radio work can in fact be sort of spit and tape and glue. I teach a series of workshops around San Francisco and other places, but I just taught a workshop for wireless systems design for non-engineers. And, the initial step into that or foray into that for that audience of folks, I took them through actually building their first crystal detector set with a piece of galena and coil of wire and a quote unquote condenser, right? So they would understand just the interplay between things like reactances, and I think we kind of take it for granted the fact that we sort of misappropriate the notion that all of radio electronics, for example, is black magic, where it is to a certain degree, and there is a niche, there is a corner of it which is certainly black magic, but the fundamentals and the concepts, selectivity and resonance and these sorts of concepts, they're actually accessible with a collection of stuff that you kind of cobble together. And if you go back as far as Shockley and Bratton and Bardeen, there's all the stories of those guys, building small crystal detector sets and hiding under their blankets and trying to listen to, various radio shows that were out in, 1920s, 1930s, that sort of thing. So, I think that ethos, it's essential for this sort of curiosity that gets people building stuff. And I've heard it characterized as kind of the pitchfork wielding horde, the people who are not, they don't need anybody's permission to go out there and build something. Mm-hmm. And they're willing to take risks, and they're willing to get in there and build all manner of kooky items. So just, I guess a kind of point of curiosity, maybe anecdotally, the company that I was at before Autodesk happened to be the evil overlords that owned Hackaday. And, Hackaday, obviously big hacker maker blog. And you can't live in the Hackaday community and not have a real appreciation for those people that are taking risks, cobbling stuff together, and building all manner of things, again, without the permission of somebody. Somebody didn't hand them a degree and say, okay, now you're an electrical engineer. Now you can finally go off and build things. So, the tools that, so I'm a big fan of Hackaday, sort of live in the Hackaday world. But I'm also an engineer, electronics engineer. I've written a lot of software, and coming into Autodesk and really taking ownership of those tools. Like, for me, this is a very personal space. Like, this is the space that I live in, I operate in. My designs are open source. They're up on GitHub. I'm part of Hackaday.io. You can go to hackaday.io/Matt, and you'll see my designs, which are up there, all of which I tend to open source. I tend to share a lot of content and resources. So participating in that community, I think, gives us a really special and kind of unique vantage point for bringing something like Eagle, for example, in-house, which is so much kind of central to that community. And though the tool itself isn't open source, the fact that they took the risk of saying, hey, we're going to open up our file format, for example, the fact that there's so much great open source content that the community has created and shared with people, I think the whole spirit of that really works super well. And combining that with good mechanical tools that are good enough for the cobbler, right? The person that's putting this bit together with this bit together with this bit to make something work. It's a really fun and sort of exciting time to be a part of that team, and actually, to be at the helm of it. You can't hope for more than just not to screw it up, right? Just to keep that community happy.
You've got a great start.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you were describing the combination of people in the sort of hacker maker community and the amateur radio, we build it ourselves kind of ethic from the very beginning, there really is a very natural overlap in that space. And I think I've seen in the last couple of years more of a concerted effort for the ham radio community to reach out to the maker community and help educate that community about wireless and what you can do with the technology. And it's because it's the maker guys who are very hands-on and really want to tinker with stuff and build stuff. And some of those guys who I know who got into ham radio that way, they come into the hobby with a vengeance because these guys are builders. And then now they've got a reason to build something. It's when you make your first Arduino, garage door opener project, it's like, well, that was great, but like now what? But when you get your license, all of a sudden, like there's a whole new world of things you can go do.
Yeah, for sure. As kids, my first foray into building my own wireless electronics was actually wireless. I'm probably gonna get a call from the Secret Service or something, but wireless detonators for model rockets.
Haven't we all?
I just repurposed the wireless controller from a remote control car and built a model rocket launcher, but one that would work wirelessly, that would enable me to do the things that I knew I shouldn't put my face anywhere near something. So I think we sort of skirt that edge a little bit. But I think, even when you're trying to educate kids, I think, so many of the tools that I have sort of within my wheelhouse right now are focused very much at that hacker maker community, but also at the K through 12 community, and trying to get that community excited about building stuff and exploring new and kind of interesting concepts and ideas and ways to express their creativity and their interests. And I don't know that you can do that without being a little bit edgier, without taking a few more risks. You hear the stories about Henry and him teaching kids about inductance by building these large magnetic systems to lift 500 pounds off of the ground and then drop it to the floor, right? And do that from across through a wall across into another classroom or something like that. And I think all of those sort of experiences, they become sort of essential signposts along the path towards developing a real interest and a real creativity, and something that'll keep you engaged.
So that hands-on is like so critical. I think that was always a big turning point for, all the hams that I know. When you're a kid and you're actually building something and half the stuff, it blows up, you can never put it back together or whatever, but it's getting that hands-on experience. And locally, my wife is a middle school teacher. She teaches science and engineering And we always lament the fact that, for the most part, there's no shop class anymore. Yeah. And, when we were in my generation was in middle school, we all took wood and metal and drafting and electrical shop,
exactly.
right?
Gone are the days of a birdhouse, right?
Yeah, you get it right. You can make a birdhouse in a bowl, and you can fry your fingers with a soldering iron, and it was awesome. And today, the kids are really insulated from that. They don't have that experience. And one exciting thing about the sort of maker world is that that's a new way to get hands-on. Also, things like FIRST Robotics, a very big way for kids to get hands-on. And you watch their eyes open up and they just light up when they get a chance to do things with their hands, because they're so insulated from that these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's curious. I mean, with the acquisition of Eagle, I mean, historically, obviously, Autodesk has been a company which has had really good tools for design and drafting, but with a focus very heavily on the mechanical side for many, many years, with things like Inventor and AutoCAD. But more recently, and by recently, I don't mean recently, but, over the course of the last, 10 years or so, it's been a real emphasis on manufacturing, and building the tools that help you to plan the factory floor. So actually, it's one of those spaces where not a lot of people know Autodesk is kind of in that world, but a lot of the stuff that you see on how it's made, or those factory environments, are actually planned using Autodesk software to plan the layout of the factory, to get the machines in order to build a line that gets a product from raw materials to packaged and out the door, ready to ship. The piece that's sort of been conspicuously missing as a company has been any foray into the electronic space. So, part of my joining the company, and certainly cemented, I think, really with the acquisition of Eagle, has been a view that at the very top level of the organization, I know it's shared by Carl Bass, the CEO, and Jeff Kowalski, CTO, and pretty much everybody within the executive management staff within the organization is really on board with the idea of Autodesk as the whole product company, and providing a set of tools and technologies that make it possible for people to build the whole product. And with a caveat to that, because we also know that by whole product, the whole product world is kind of changing, where historically, you'd conceptualize an idea, but to get it to market required that you were able to produce 50,000 pieces or 100,000 pieces or something like that. And with the maker movement, what we've really proven was that there is a market, there is an appetite for high mix, low volume. And Eagle has really been at sort of the center of that ecosystem, for better or for worse, right?
So explain to our listeners, when you say high mix, low volume, what you mean by that.
Yeah, so by high mix, low volume, what I mean is that we've got people who are interested in building, software-defined radio, and they want to build 100 pieces. They don't want to build 50,000 or 100,000 pieces, because there may not be a market for that. But there may just well be a market for 100 or 500 or 1,000 pieces. And so when we talk about high mix, low volume, the idea is sort of smashing that misconception that all pieces go to China, or all things go to China, and you build and ship 1 million pieces. And the reality is that's just plainly not true. There's all sorts of analysis which is done every year on the way that circuit boards are manufactured, and absolutely nothing points to that. There are very few products which ship 100,000 pieces or 200,000 pieces, even over 50,000 pieces. The refrigerator market, there just aren't that many consumers for as many different brands of refrigerators as there are. And all of the variations within the brands themselves. So, your Maytags or your Kenmores or whatever, there's just not that much in the way of a market there. So, you're not building millions and millions of refrigerator controller boards, right? It just doesn't happen. Probably the largest category is actually industrial control systems. And even in those categories, it's not millions and millions of pieces that you're shipping. You're shipping tens of thousands of pieces or something like that. But I think these days, there's this appetite for mass customization and then also, more personal ownership. So I think what the maker community has proved is that if I can build it myself, I won't buy it from you. Mm-hmm. So, in that context, then you really have to sort of rethink manufacturing. So PCB fabrication, PCB assembly, how do I get one piece or 5 pieces or 10 pieces? And if it's somebody who's a little more entrepreneurial, how do we enable them to build 100 pieces? So, at Supplyframe, which is a company that owns Hackaday, we also owned Tindy. And Tindy was designed as a sort of Etsy for electronics. So you can go to Tindy and if you've got a software-defined radio and you want to sell it to people, you can post it there and put some anchor text around it, interesting text around it that describes the product, give it a description, and customers can come there and they can buy the product. And it's drop shipped from you direct to the customer, but Tindy handles the transaction processing and some of those pieces. At Hackaday, they eventually built the Hackaday store, and that was kind of the extension of that to say, okay, on one level, I want some level of social proof, which says, hey, people are interested in this, and Tindy is one example of that. But if I want to get to that next sort of stage in development, maybe it's not appropriate for a crowdfunding campaign, though I think that's, it's done a lot to create opportunity for people. We got to thinking, what could we do to enable people, certainly within the Hackaday community, to start selling products? And the solution to that was, well, we'll just write them a PO. We'll buy 500 pieces. We'll fund their first production run, or quote unquote production run. But when you think about 500 pieces, you don't historically associate that with a production run. But this is where we get into high mix, low volume. Is that 500 pieces could be all the pieces that somebody's going to build of something, and it could be even fewer than that. When you look at Oshpark, for example, most people don't send a board to Oshpark and say, you know what, I want to build 50,000 pieces. They say, look, I want 6 boards back by tomorrow. Right? Or 2 weeks from now or whatever. I don't think they do tomorrow. I think their rush service is like 3 days. But I think that's, it's sort of challenging some of the original assertions. And it's interesting that Eagle has been sort of at the center of a lot of that.
So to do that, you not only have to have the libraries of common components and a lot of reference design material so you can more rapidly assemble a design, but you also have to have the whole back-end process with a manufacturing flow that lets you do automated assembly for very low volume. And it's interesting to see there's a change where 5-10 years ago, you either hand-assembled something or you made a lot.
Right.
1,000, right. 10,000, 1,000 minimum. And today there's a lot of businesses out there where you could do your design in Eagle, send the Gerbers off. There's a bill of material that comes out of that, and a company can make 5 or 50 or 500 or whatever you want to pay for.
Absolutely.
And that's just making that whole back-end process efficient and cost-effective is very exciting. I mean, it's for a hobbyist, it's great because we can make 50 of something for all of our buddies.
Exactly.
But it's also the way to kind of bootstrap a business because maybe you have an idea and you in the past you'd have to have 50 grand to make a bunch.
Right.
And now you can make a handful for 1,000.
Right. And I think so it's curious. I mean, leading up to the acquisition of Eagle, and I'll sort of tip my hand a bit. Leading up to the acquisition of Eagle, it was very clear that we wanted to not just acquire a piece of software, but we really wanted to enable the community. And, there were some things that I think everybody would sort of agree were a bit long in the tooth. And some things that we could improve both about the software, but then also about the process in which people designed electronics in general. And so through the acquisition or leading up to the acquisition, we started to look for PCB manufacturers and PCB assembly houses and started to line them up. So you can expect that over the life cycle of the Eagle product, we'll get to a place where we will bring those organizations in closer to the design process and try to simplify that, not just the process of getting the bare board built, but also getting your components ordered and getting the board assembled. They're all priorities for us. My hope would be that if I had a chemical engineering student in a university course at, some state university somewhere, that when they decided that they wanted to build a new sensor and they needed to get a piece of electronics built, that they wouldn't have to go through the process of trying to figure out the difference between RS-274D and RS-274X and exactly what an IPC D356 netlist is. And do I need one? Do I not need one? You know, if you have to understand all of that stuff, I think it already sort of breaks it for a lot of people and creates more complexity than what people are really prepared to endure. I think what Arduino had done was prove that there was this whole class of people who wanted a way for which software could bridge the real world. And Arduino is really that. In my opinion, right, humble opinion, right, Arduino is really about that. It's about building a software system which can bridge the real world. And the real world is fundamentally analog. It's involves sensors and controllers. You're creating the sort of appendages that reach out and have some sensory impact or sensory input and some motor impact on the world around them. And so the challenge with that, and I think this is where we got really excited at Autodesk, was, I don't have any products at home that have an Arduino inside. So, how do we make it real for somebody to go from that sort of conceptual framework to a real physical PCB, but then not stop there? Understand that it's not just about building the PCB. It's about getting the PCB into an enclosure. It's about getting the batteries into the enclosure and connecting them up using the correct cables. It's about getting that into a box, getting a piece of tape put on it, getting a label put on it, and shipped out to somebody. And the more that we can do to kind of simplify that whole workflow is certainly a priority on the Eagle side of things. Not of course to exclude all of the other stuff that we want to do to Eagle at the same time. So we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, it seems like there's just an endless list of things that could be done, but I could see where you could really build a whole flow that just enables that whole process. I mean, there's really no reason why it can't be done. It's just a matter of having the vision and the will to make it happen.
Absolutely. And look, that's not to say that we're not going to double down and focus on Eagle's core. I think we all know that we can improve routing in Eagle, that we can improve library management, library creation. I think we can do a better job of aggregating library information from other sources. We know that there's this whole wealth of open source content that's out there. I don't want to do what the other guy's doing and bring all of that, sort of force all of that open source content into a closed ecosystem. However, I would love to be able to surface that content. So if it's stored in GitHub, that I could place a library from a GitHub directory locally, and know that when the GitHub repository is updated, that the library is out of date. Those sorts of fundamental capabilities that can kind of keep us connected really to that open source community in a very real way, but don't require that everybody sort of find themselves in our world, living according to our rules, but instead we bring the application to them. I think there's some features that we can round out in schematic, maybe some improvements to the wiring tools, improvements to hierarchy, things like that. I think everybody kind of understands where the challenges are with the core of Eagle, but I think before joining Autodesk, full disclosure, I was at Altium for the better part of about 15 plus years. I was at Axel, the company that owned PCAD actually before that, and was part of the acquisition there. And look, all of these are knowable problems. They're not problems of scientific sophistication. They're just things that require development resources to solve. And thankfully, with Autodesk's horsepower, I've got the development resources to jump in there and start solving some of those problems. So, we're pretty active right now in development. We sort of, we made our short list and said, hey, these are all the things that we think Eagle users would really appreciate. And we, a lot of that is coming directly in through the support guys. So, shout out to Ed Robledo and George Garcia and the guys in Europe, Richard Hammerl and Andre Schmitz, who have been the faithful sort of servants of Eagle in the public community, who have done a great job of really keeping the CADSoft product alive and out there in the community and helping people to use the product. Great thing is that they're fantastic advocates on behalf of the users, and they're good at driving the development team to build out a pretty killer product.
Well, I've had really good support from those guys. So I started using Eagle about 8 years ago, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And originally, this is when I was designing this ham radio repeater control system with a buddy of mine, John, KJ6K. And the first version of the board we did was with one of these free software packages that you'd download, schematic capture, do board layout. The schematic editor did not drive the layout. The layout was all mechanical. You probably know which one I'm talking about.
Yep.
And it produced a very pretty schematic. But
Sure.
But then when you go to make the board, you can only make the board through them. It was their tool.
Right.
And tool was free. What do you want? And the boards were perfectly fine. So that was great to start with. But after a while, you know how circuit complexity, at some point you need a correct by construction, a real CAD tool.
Right.
And so we looked around, and the reason that we picked Eagle was that it had such a huge community support that you could find libraries for like anything, tons of examples, and it just seemed like, that was the best bet. And so we went with that, and we were able to make our first board in a week, and haven't looked back. And we've continued to use Eagle for dozens and dozens of boards at this point. In fact, by the way, you may not know this, but just today, in fact, I'm holding it in my hand, I've got Rev 2 of our first Ham Radio 360 Workbench community build project.
Oh, fantastic.
So I don't know if you heard about this thing or not, but we designed a antenna analyzer.
Yep.
And a good friend of mine, Berggren, K6BEZ, is the guy who designed the circuit, and Berggren is a RF test equipment designer professionally. So he came up with this idea of a low-cost antenna analyzer, and it's got a direct digital synthesis chip and an Arduino and an LCD display.
Yep.
And he built a prototype, and then I took his prototype and I laid the board out in Eagle, and got the second round of prototype boards today, and the thing looks great. So
yeah. No, and I've heard this. So I've heard this evolving over the course of the show as well. So full disclosure, right? So I'm a listener. I love the show. I think it's funny because I've been invited to a couple of podcasts, Embedded FM, and a few other sorts of places to kind of chat about just electronics in general, and it turns I'm the one that tends to be more starstruck, like, oh, this is so great, I actually get to hang out with the people that are that I'm listening to every day. It's so interesting to hear a project actually evolve or sort of emerge within that community, sort of from the sort of primordial ooze, so to speak, and hear all the different contributors on it. I mean, when we started the Hackaday IO site at SupplyFrame, it was really about that. It was just, we didn't feel like there was a place where people could sort of build stuff publicly and then kind of riff on it. So they added like a real-time chat, sort of IRC style chat feature on the site there. And it's not to sort of advertise Hackaday too much, but shout out to my friends over there, because they're all good, well-meaning people, and there's a lot of hams in that community.
Is there really?
Like and now it's they're really pushing SDR, like really.
Oh yeah.
It's so much energy and effort on software-defined radio and then various spectrum analyzers that everybody seems to be building a spectrum analyzer, which it's great. I mean to watch. So in fairness, right? I mean my background is very much around wireless electronics, and to watch people who are coming into this, again, the pitchfork wielding horde building something as sophisticated as a spectrum analyzer is just it's so inspiring to see it actually happen. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for that to continue to grow. I think it's totally incumbent on the ham community to connect the dots for a lot of these guys. So you've got a lot of people who are trying to build these things, and I think one of the things that certainly your show does, and one of the reasons why Autodesk will continue to sponsor the show going forward. Obviously, full disclosure, we're sponsors of the show. I mean, we picked up CADsoft, but we were enthusiastic about the show long before we had CADSoft as a twinkle in our eye. But as we've sort of watched these things emerge like this, I think we have to be enablers of this community to really share and socialize content and then be supportive of those folks that are building out some really cool and interesting stuff. I love watching this this moment where folks just it clicks for people, right? And this is the first time that they've managed to do something successfully. I think for us, the real focus as a company has to be to connect that path from maker to manufacturing, and provide a sort of well-lit path. I've without being too long-winded about it, I've got a 17-year-old, and the emphasis that I sort of always place on things that he does is, look, get it to a state of completion, right? Like don't just leave the drill half hanging out of the wall. There was a great Far Side, I think, at one point where, the drill's half hanging out of the wall, right? And the guy's sitting on the sofa and, he hasn't quite gotten the picture up yet. And, get it to a state of completion, right? Like don't compromise on what it means to sort of complete something. You've got an opportunity to build an enclosure, right? If you've got an opportunity to build something which kind of looks like a product, build something that looks like a product. When I build a headphone amplifier, I put as much energy and effort into the case as I put into the electronics that I put inside of it, and sometimes more so. I think you realize those builds, everybody recognizes those builds and they say, wow, that's really cool. Like somebody really put in the time and the energy and the effort in it. I think that's, you got to start small, right? Walk before you run, get into the space. But, the opportunity to go in there and sort of complete something, it's never been more real that you could build something that looked like a production product.
Well, very professionally. I mean, when I think about the stuff I built as a young ham, it would look like a disaster because, you had like plastic boxes with holes that you would melt as you soldered the wire. I mean, just the stuff looked awful. But now, I remember, I used to make prototypes of stuff on vector board and, what a nightmare. And today, even if I just want to make one of something, I'll just make a circuit board because it's not worth the pain and agony of point wiring stuff. And the thing looks like really professional when you're done. And if somebody else says, that's pretty cool, I'd love one too. You can go, no sweat, here's the board. Right. Build it yourself. And, and the funny thing is that the more guys I've talked to about building stuff, they're very energized. I tend to find two kinds of builders in this space. One is they either say, I have no idea what I want to build, but I want to build something, and I want to learn something along the way. Like I want to learn about an Arduino and how does that work, or I want to learn about an antenna. Like in this antenna analyzer thing, I've got questions from guys like, well, how does a watt meter work? Well, that's a great question. It's very simple, but you don't know unless you know. Right. So they don't know what to ask necessarily. And then there's other guys who have a specific project, but they don't know what tools to use. They don't know that the thing they're trying to do could be done with an Arduino and 20 lines of code in an hour. And they just don't know. They haven't got that experience yet. So I think part of the trick is to take advantage of all these great platforms that are out there, from Arduinos and Raspberry Pis to the software development tools, et cetera. But if you can make it easy enough to go from concept to circuit to manufacturing without it sucking a lot of time, that's awesome. Because I think the biggest challenge any of us have is it's never, are you smart enough, or that's not the issue. 100% it's, do you have the time? It's really, do you have the time to figure out how to make that flow work? And if you're a professional and you do it for a living, you do it, right? But if you're, you got a family, you got kids and stuff to do, you can't spend 4 days learning how to go from a schematic to the fab. You need some help to make that flow better. So I think the kind of stuff you guys are working on and where your vision is really compelling. I mean, I could see where there's a commercial application for it, but for us hobbyists, we're hopefully excited to sit on the right on the coattails of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that whole notion of abstraction and modularity and reuse, Arduino proved that people would accept a software abstraction that moved them sufficiently far away from the hardware if it made them more efficient in how they wrote embedded software. So if you could just reduce it down to a setup function and a program loop, people would accept that they didn't really understand the low-level details about how that was writing to an I/O register or something like that to change the state on a particular port. It's curious though, because I think what's good for that maker community, and you alluded to this, is absolutely appropriate then for the professional engineer. Mm-hmm. I think most engineering organizations suffer from the fact that they've got a couple of people who are really good at specific areas. Somebody who's great at power supply design, somebody who's great at FPGA development, your VHDL and Verilog guru who kind of sits in a corner, and somebody who's great at analog front ends. And, they live in these sort of silos. They build their capabilities exceptionally well. But then, even in larger organizations, they don't necessarily communicate content with one another or share that content. And I think when you start to sort of think in a more abstract way, and I think Arduino and the concept of the shield, I think a lot of what Adafruit is doing, SparkFun with their Seed with their Grove boards, and SparkFun with their various plugin modules, what they've said is, if you work at this higher level of abstraction, then we can sort of encapsulate capabilities which may not be your specialization. And it is a sort of famous story around the sort of semiconductor world, and having worked for years as an FAE for other ECAD tools. A lot of my customers were semiconductor companies, and there's a famous story sort of around the semiconductor world where there's Cypress was putting out a PSOC board for one of their programmable system-on-chip boards, and on there was an IDT clock. And what was so curious about it was the fact that, somewhere inside of Cypress, no doubt, there is somebody who knows that, a large portion of the history of that company is actually building clocks and oscillators. And they were buying a clock from a competitor because the guy in the PSOC team didn't know that Cypress's origins were actually as a company that build clocks and oscillators and these other sorts of things. So, that notion that collaboration is really central to good design, whether it's in the context of a company or it's outside of that. And then the benefits, obviously, of modularity and reuse. I don't want to be the guy that designs switch mode power supplies, right? I'm a wireless front end guy. Like I don't want to deal with switch mode power supplies. I want to get as far away from the switch mode power supply as possible. Thank you very much. But I think the opportunity there for both for the maker and for the professional is really there. And I think what you'll see emerge in Eagle over the course of the next 6, 12, 18 months, that sort of thing, is a real emphasis or doubling down on those capabilities to really try to shore up that position.
So does that mean that if you take the Arduino analogy, the hardware modularity came with many companies building to a standard form factor for the shield interfaces, the electrical signals and the mechanical layout and all that. And when you think about a circuit board, you think, well, it's all free form. You can do whatever you want. How do you see this sort of modularity playing into a strategy around a tool like Eagle?
Well, I think there's, it's curious because there's a lot of different levels that this could actually play out at. If we only built one sort of sub-circuit per breakout board. So by sub-circuit, I mean, let's say that I've got a temperature sensor with, a couple of decoupling capacitors or pull up or whatever it needs on it as one breakout board. I've got a motor controller, a fan controller on another breakout board, and then a microprocessor subsystem on another breakout board. And I were to put all three of those into a breadboard. Those three sort of sub-circuits and their connections between them, just, the wires running between them, are actually kind of totally analogous to a PCB in a very sort of real kind of physical way. I think that, ESP8266 is, a great example of something which encapsulated Wi-Fi. NRF 51822. There's, so many modules for that chip. encapsulating BLE, and saying, you know what, we're going to put all the functionality into this block and nothing more. Those small little modular elements, I think, whether they exist in the context of a board, and I played around with this on the breadboard, with the breadboard sort of modeling this concept, where if I just had breakout boards for each singular function, and I put them together on a breadboard, straddling that center groove down the center of the breadboard there, the wires that connected those various breakout boards together with one another were analogous to a track in PCB. Mm-hmm. And I know that it sounds like totally intuitive. It's like, yeah, of course they are. But if you think about that, you should almost be able to infer a PCB netlist directly from that connectivity. Because, at that point, you've just got a block, and you've got the interface to that block, and the interface to that block is routed to another block, is routed to another block, is routed into power at the various levels inside of in the context of the breadboard, and likewise in the context of the PCB. So, I think the sort of first pass on the Eagle side of things has to really focus around how do we capture a block of schematic circuitry and PCB circuitry in a way in which they're truly reusable.
Yeah, exactly. That's the path that you're going down there is what struck me. It seemed like you would have those little macros, if you will,
exactly.
of pre-defined schematic structures and also the circuit board layer topology.
Exactly.
So you could just Lego them together and it all melds into one board.
Exactly. I mean, it's, how many times I gave a talk to a crowd full of people in Shenzhen at one point, and I asked 1,000 people in a room, how many of you have used the FT232, right? USB to serial conversion. 1,000 hands go up, right? Said, okay, so how many of you have drawn the schematic for the FT232? And again, 1,000 hands go up, right? And, you sort of look at that and you say, God, not only is that a profound waste of human energy, right? But it's also likely that some percentage, and a meaningful percentage, got it wrong. Mm-hmm. Used the wrong chip, or used the wrong, the wrong capacitor, wrong resistor, whatnot. Wired it incorrectly. Net names were screwed up because they decided they would do something cute and interesting with the hierarchy in a schematic or net labels or whatever. However they screwed it up, right? Some percentage of those people screwed it up. So, I think part of the energy and the effort that we also have to put on this is how do we encapsulate the good and then be able to identify those things as sort of known good capabilities. The semiconductor manufacturers have been looking to do this for years, right? I mean, go to TI, go to Maxim, go to Microchip, whomever, and clearly, I mean, their reference designs are an expression of how do we make it easy for people to use our chip, right? Like that's at the core of their success. So, if you ask any of them, they will say that there is a huge difference in terms of the likelihood that a customer will purchase their part if the customer downloads a reference design versus downloading a data sheet.
Well, I would bet half the designs that turn into commercial products, the sub-circuit that's in the real production design is the reference circuit. Well,
exactly. I mean, as a professional engineer who shipped, consumer products, I would have FAEs come in, and the FAE would describe to me how to use something. They would modify the schematic and hand it to me. Here's the solution to your problem. Implement this. I'm like, oh, great, sweet, better you than me, right? I'm going to go catch my kid's Little League game. If you want to finish the rest of it, right? I've got the FPGA routing to finish.
Knock yourself out.
Yeah, exactly. You know anything about DDR? Because I don't. I think it's a huge opportunity to aggregate the data from those guys. I think what, obviously Adafruit and SparkFun and Seed Studio and those folks have done has really been essential to making those things work. I think the other piece, which, if we sort of look at the manufacturing side of all of this as well, is having that feedback loop from an assembly house that says, yeah, you know what? The footprints are good. They can be soldered. The test report on this thing came back legit and good, right? Not just continuity, but functional testing, these sorts of things. So, obviously, I'm sort of projecting out into the future, but I think there are lots of ways. There's still a lot of room for innovation.
One area I'm curious about is like component selection. So for me, when I'm building a project, I have in my head a bunch of little circuits and favorite parts, right? So you built a project with the old 7805, and by God, you're going to put a 7805 and everything, right?
That's right.
So there's sort of your go-to list of parts, but there's always something new that you have to go rustle up one of, and the more of a commodity the part is, in a way, the harder it is to find it.
Right.
Because you go to DigiKey and you type in 200 microhenry 1 amp inductor, and there's 1,000.
Yeah.
And like your head swimming, like, oh, well, I guess any of them. But then you have to go you have to go check and see if there's inventory, and then you have to make sure that it's the right footprint and it's the same footprint that you have on your board. And it's just kind of like it's not, none of that's hard, but it chews away at your family time. It's
right.
like wasted energy that. And one reason why I like that whole Arduino paradigm was so powerful is if I needed a 3 relays, I could go buy the 3 relay shield, and I knew it would work. I didn't have to I wonder if this flavor of shield will work with that. No, they're all work by definition. So I think if you could help make that part of the process easier also, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think that's super high on the priority list. You'll actually see that the beginnings of that take shape. Hopefully, in time for the 7.7 release, will be the beginnings of the first sort of integration with the supply chain side of things, bringing in pricing and availability information, or rather. Just exporting your BOM into sites which are great for those sorts of things. Fine Chips, for example, is a brilliant site which has aggregated pricing and availability information. It also manages currencies and lead times and quantity. So, if you know that you're only going to build 5 of them, then you certainly don't want to buy a reel, right? Mm-hmm. Unless it's a 4.7K resistor, and then you might say, yeah, you know what, look, in my lifetime, I'm going to go through a real 4.7K resistors. So the connection into the supply chain side of things is super high on the priority list. And I think that's also, as we eye up how we make real this path from maker to manufacturing, that's essential, because it's one of those pieces that, like the ham who's building this thing without a lot of product background, or an artist who's trying to build a really cool new variation on a lamp or some mixed media visual art thing that they're going to sell in somebody's house, or sell on something like an Etsy, and people are going to put in their house, whatever it is. They are not supply chain ninjas. And there are companies that have a whole part of their organization dedicated to this. So whatever we can do to automate that process or simplify and streamline that process is really high on the priority list.
Oh, that's awesome. I would love to see that. I saw an interesting shot at that from, you mentioned Seed Studio, and they have an assembly service, and they have a blessed parts list.
Yeah, the OPL.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think, it's curious, because if you look at the OPL, a lot of that is based on a couple of very real things. First of all, they have pick and place equipment, which often, like at Seed Studio, some of the pick and place equipment that they're using are these smaller sort of benchtop Neoden machines, and I've actually got one over my shoulder right here. The TM245, and there's a 245P, and Dangerous Prototypes, I think, did a review of the 240, which was the previous version. Now there's a new generation which has cameras and whatnot. But this company Neoden, which is a Chinese company, I think, based out of Shanghai, but selling these things, builds benchtop pick and place machines. And Seed Studio's got a few of them. They can pre-reel the machine with a bunch of components because they know you're going to use the FT232.
Yeah, exactly.
And they know that you're going to use the BMP85. And
yeah, I went down the OPL list, and and it's when I first looked at it, I think there's like 100 parts, and it's the usual, 0.1 caps and 10K resistors and 7805s, and okay, some slightly more exotic things, some switchers and whatnot. But but yeah, that's because when you go to build something, even though DigiKey stocks 20 million parts, there's probably a catalog of a couple hundred that you will probably ever use.
Right.
Except for that one wacky, specialty chip. But everything else is pretty standard, which is a big plus too, because you understand that stuff. And, once you've done a circuit with it, you're familiar with it, and you could do another one really quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the comment that I made earlier about, Autodesk being very close to the factory floor and actually building a lot of tools for factory planning, you can imagine that, there's a real interest in planning the assembly shop floor as well. In a better way. So enabling assembly shops to understand what components customers are using, so they can provide them pre-reeled on these carts of reels, because that's how reels machines are typically reeled. Is you'll reel a bunch of components, but you'll have it on a rolling cart. So I can push the whole cart of reels into the machine and then start feeding, slide them all into the feeders and then load up the pick and place machine ready to go. If we can serialize that a bit and, get a couple of machines in series, run the components through the various pick and place machines, or the boards through the various pick and place machines, those pick and place machines have room for a heck of a lot more than 100 components. If you've got 3 or 4 or 5 of them on the factory floor, in series, you've got a real opportunity to cover quite a bit in the way of mix as far as components, as far as designs are concerned. So, we've got our work cut out for us in that space too, but it's not as though we're new to the factory floor. We've been building the software which people have been using to design factories for quite a while. And, being one of the companies with sort of the premier software for factory planning, you can imagine that there'll be a big push to enable better planning at the electronics manufacturing leg of that journey, with better feedback then into the design side. So, when you send it off to an assembly house, that you're not paying for setup cost for something. The assembly house then, can pre-order components, drive the cost of the parts down, and provide you a sort of value-added service, assembly at much lower cost and without the 2 or 3 or 4 week lead time that it takes for you to get the components in-house before you ship them off to them. Then, they get them, they put SKUs on them, and have to track it through their system and, provide you with storage on site. Well, you hope they provide you with storage, something which is humidity controlled and temperature controlled and that sort of thing. So, there's a lot to getting something through assembly. And, it all breaks down when you talk about high mix, low volume. So this push towards high mix, low volume and trying to solve a lot of those problems will actually drive us to make some real innovations in that space. And I can say safely that we're already making innovations in that space. But I'll hold the cards a little closer and not tip my hand too much as to what the sort of first pass of that looks like.
Well, that sounds really, really fascinating, and I'm sure we'd love to come back and revisit that when you've got the next set of new things coming out that you can talk about. So,
absolutely.
So I think. I really want to thank you, Matt, for your time. I know you're very busy, and especially right now with all this, the acquisitions and sorting all this out. So for our listeners, I want to thank you very much for spending the time with us. It's been great, and I'd love to have you come back.
Oh, I appreciate it. Anytime.
All right. Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Wow. That was amazing.
Well, isn't he an interesting guy?
He is, and the sad thing is you asked me if I wanted to hang around for that, and I wasn't feeling good, and it was really late, and I was like, no, it's okay. And, after you and I talked afterwards, that was like one of the worst decisions I've ever made in my life, to not hang around for that conversation.
I know you would have really enjoyed it, but when we were done, I did ask Matt if he wouldn't mind spending some more time with us on another episode, and he's more than happy to do it.
Outstanding.
So yeah, that was really fun. I really enjoyed it a bunch.
All right, let's get into our question segment, which has been missing for 2 episodes.
Okay, so what's question number 1?
So this one is not from our listeners per se, but since I've posted my battery comparison video on YouTube, I have gotten 20 people either criticizing me or asking, why did you terminate the test at 11.8 volts? And I actually covered that in the video, why I selected that as the cutoff voltage. Because a lot of people are like, well, that's not fair to the AGM battery because the discharge voltage on the AGM is 10.5. Okay, true. But again, we're hams. Just about everything we do is 13.8 volts plus or minus 15%. The minus 15% value is 11.78 volts. I round up to 11.8. Two things to point out about this value is in a lead acid AGM battery, 11.8 volts is approximately 60% depth of discharge, meaning that the battery still has about 40% of its energy left until you get to 10.5, which is just dead. The other thing is, for a lead acid battery to discharge all the way down to 10.5, you're going to significantly reduce its overall lifespan. If you are somebody who owned like an ICOM IC7000, you know that your battery or your radio will still receive on those lower voltages, but if you try to transmit, all kinds of terrible things happen. The signal gets dirty, the very low power output, etc. The radio just doesn't like it. So that's why I selected that value. The other thing is, for the lithium iron phosphate battery, at 11.8 volts, that's approximately 90% depth of discharge. So immediately off the bat, this is another reason why lithium iron phosphate batteries are better for amateur radio portable purposes, because you can actually have more usable energy out of the battery. I don't think I said this specifically, but voltage is a terrible indicator of depth of discharge for lithium iron or lithium chemistry batteries because they have a relatively flat discharge curve. And that's why you have to use like Coulomb counting or amp hour monitoring to get a better sense of the quote unquote gas gauge state of those batteries. Because truthfully, the dead voltage for those is 11.2 volts, and that fall off from 11.8 to 11.2 happens very rapidly. So that's why I chose 11.8 volts as my cutoff voltage. Now, the other criticism you can make is the Elecraft, like the KX3, the KX2, and even the Yaesu FT817. Those radios actually can operate down in the 10-ish, 10.5 volt range. But that's still not good for either battery. So that's why I stopped at 11.8 volts.
Well, that certainly makes sense then. I didn't really think about the 15% off of 13.8, but that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, because even if you're down that low, some HF radios won't do full power output at that. They won't do 100 watts at the lower end of the 13.8 or sorry, the minus 15%. So that's why I picked that value, and will continue to use that as kind of my standard for tests that I do.
Makes sense to me. And by the way, that material on the battery was really super useful. I mentioned the presentation with the club, and the point you made, which is it's very difficult to monitor a lithium battery voltage as depth of discharge. Somebody mentioned that at the meeting, and I thought, yeah, well, that's a really great point. I don't really know what you would do unless you're looking at the terminal voltage very closely. But I guess in a LiFePO4 battery monitoring system, they're really constantly measuring the current draw and the voltage and figuring out the total energy being used, not just the terminal voltage, I guess. Yeah,
and that's exactly what happens in your cell phone. You actually have there is a battery management chip inside of your cell phone and really pretty much your laptop, anything that has a rechargeable lithium battery. And it is actually doing what is called Coulomb counting, where it is actually counting the coulombs that pass, through whatever its detection circuitry is. For those devices, they're low current enough, they may actually be passing through the chip. And so the parameters of the battery are programmed into that chip, and that's how it pays attention. One of the more common applications for battery monitoring is marine stuff. If you have a big boat with a large battery bank, it's really important to understand the state of charge for your battery bank. And one of the elements, I don't remember the company that made it. I'm sorry, it was Victron Energy. If you've watched my videos on building the portable power box 2.0, which George, you built a version of, but this is actually the one component in my bill of materials you did not use. Victron Energy, these meters are expensive. They're like $250 for this little round meter. And this round meter is completely programmable, whether you're doing lead-based batteries, lithium-based batteries, and then what flavor of lithium. But when you program the battery, you are actually putting in a lot of factors, including the amp hour rating of the battery. it relies on a current shunt in order to actually count amp hours. And this is similar to like the what's up type meters we've talked about in the past, like the inline DC power meters. They are counting amp hours. And so you can build a gas gauge based off amp hours. So for instance, the BioNO battery power that I did at a 10 amp continuous draw, gave me about 7.2 amp hours. And so if I were setting up a system where I was relying on an external monitor, I would have it basically shut down after about 7 amp hours of draw, because that gives me enough headroom that I'm not going to kill the battery. And I would do that instead of looking at voltage. If it's a lead-based system, I'll still stick with voltage because the voltage is a good predictor. And if you've seen my graphs in the video, you see the AGM discharge is a fairly linear discharge.
That certainly makes sense. Yeah. So I like that idea that you're really looking at the total energy that's being consumed at that point, not just the terminal voltage.
Exactly.
All right. Do we have any other questions in the old mailbag there?
So the next question we have comes from John. And John basically is asking the question, I have 1 million antennas that I need to put in the air. I want to put a digital TV antenna, a VHF, UHF antenna, some HF antennas. I've got a cell phone booster repeater that I want to put on here. And if I'm going to go to the trouble of getting a tower and putting all this stuff on it, I need some guidance on how do I arrange my antennas, what order do I put them in, how far apart do I space them, and he's really looking for some tips on how to do this. I'm afraid I know what the answer is going to be to this one.
What do you think the answer is going to be?
Like everything else in the world, it depends.
Yes, that is actually the correct answer. It depends. I mean, with only that information, there's no other details supplied in the question. That was it.
I mean, yeah, we don't know what type of equipment he's using. I mean, he mentions he wants some reception antennas for SDR plays, which are little SDR receivers. Mm-hmm. He talks about separating a quarter wave for HF antennas. So, I mean, obviously without knowing the specifics or knowing the specific radios, because the amount of interference you're going to experience is really device dependent for everything in the system. But I think there are some guidelines, George, you can probably give him that are good rules of thumb and things to look out for when trying to design this.
Oh, sure. There's some very basic things which will sound just incredibly obvious, and that is the more physical separation, the better. Well, of course. So if you have a choice of putting the antennas close together or farther apart, that would make a big difference to keep them further apart. The problem with the question is that we don't know the frequency of the different radios. Are they very adjacent in the same band, or are they very different frequency bands? We don't know the quality of the receiver, meaning we don't know what kind of front-end filtering or other kinds of protection there is on the receivers, or even the transmitters for that matter. We also don't know how much power we're talking about on the transmitters. So all of those play a big have a big factor in determining how close you can go away with putting the antennas. But separation is the first thing you'd want to do. One thing to keep in mind that people don't think about very often is that if you can separate your antennas vertically, let's say you have vertical antennas, if you can separate them vertically, one on top of another, that will give you more isolation than having them side by side. So if you had two verticals, let's say two 2-meter vertical antennas, maybe one's on your SDR for VHF and one's your ham radio, if they're vertical and they're a few feet apart, there'll be some level of isolation. If you could move one of the antennas on top of the other one, you're going to get several dB more attenuation just because the lobes of the antennas are broadside of the antenna, not at the end of the antenna. So that would be another consideration, go vertical. If you have a choice of what kind of radio you're going to buy and you know you're in a high RF environment where you might be inflicting RF on yourself, that really gives you pause to consider what kind of receivers you're going to buy or what kind of transmitters. I'll give you an example. Our friend Berggren, who is doing the antenna analyzer, he took a Baofeng handy talkie and put it on a spectrum analyzer and keyed up. And that thing was so dirty. There are so many spurs that were not attenuated sufficiently that he took a screen snapshot of that and he was forwarding it to everybody on our emailing list. And it was really awful. And you don't know it's bad because you key up and you talk and it sounds okay. but in reality, it's a very dirty transmitter. Or you could have another transmitter by a different vendor, or maybe just a different model that could be much better. So, you just don't know until you really set this up and try it out. So if you do know you have a lot of RF, then more filtering, more higher quality receivers would make a bigger difference. So that's about the extent of what I would suggest. Now, one other last thing, actually, if you could also put some additional filters, external filters on your radios. So, for example, you can get HF bandpass filters, helical bandpass filters that you can stick in line. That might help. You could put a 2-meter bandpass filter on. So you can always do that. But once you set everything up, if you encounter interference, and it's interference in a frequency combination that you will use often, then you could start to address that problem by building some kind of notch filters to take out the offending signal. So there's some things you could do retroactively to try to solve the problem. And
of course, building filters is going to be easier on the HF side of things and into VHF, but start getting difficult when you get into UHF. I have zero experience in this, other than I know I've seen other people where they mount their antennas that you will generally see. George, is there a guideline of mount your VHF, UHF antennas above your HF antenna? And I don't know if this is a dipole or if it's a beam. Or, are there any rules about stacking in order of frequency or anything like that?
No, not really. There's only a mechanical consideration. What you see most of the time is the HF antenna will tend to be at lower. Let's say if you have a push-up mast or a tower, and at the top of the tower you have a Yagi, for example. Typically, you're going to put your 2-meter and UHF antennas on top of that, just because it's a smaller antenna. So, it's a mechanical mounting thing. There's really nothing about the antenna being above or below that makes much of any difference, frankly. So, and if you're talking about, by the way, if you're talking about huge frequency separations of, let's say, 2 meters to HF, there's not going to be much interaction with that to begin with. So that's really not probably a big deal.
One of the only areas that comes to mind, because I know he mentions a cell phone repeater. Those are probably going to be a little bit higher quality receiver than most types of things, and designed to work in an environment where they may not know what type of RF situation there are. But the one area when I read this is talking about the SDR plays. This is basically a USB box that plugs into the computer and has an SMA connector on it. And if you're running that up to a discone and you are pumping 100 watts through your HF antenna, and that discone is capable of receiving that, is there any risk of actually blowing your receiver up?
Well, hypothetically, yes, but in practice, probably not. If the antennas are not physically touching, you're not actually applying a voltage to the receiver. It's just over the air, albeit a very short distance. You're probably not going to damage anything. It's possible, but most likely you're not going to damage it. What you will find is that really strong transmitter on a very poorly filtered receiver will cause the front end of the receiver to block, which means that it'll be overloaded and you may not hear anything. Or in the case of an FM radio, you might have another FM transmitter that's going to block the front end. So let's say if you have two 2-meter radios and you listen to, let's say, APRS packet data on one radio and the repeater on the other radio, when you key up on one, it might wipe out the other one. It's very possible depending on the quality of the radio. So when you're very close in frequency, that's a potential problem. It's also possible, if you're really unlucky, that you might have some mixed product, so that maybe one transmitter, when it transmits, its signal is mixing in some equipment and producing some other mixed product that could be landing on another receive frequency, and you just never know until you actually set it all up and try it out. So in a way, it's a very unfulfilling answer, because the answer is, who knows? Hook it up and see what you get, and then go from there. But my best advice is get the best quality equipment you can and as much separation as you can. By the way, very broadband consumer receivers like TV receivers, and for that matter, cell phone receivers, are not very selective. They're not super tuned, protected front ends. So it's easier to wipe those things out than, let's say, a commercial two-way radio. So something to bear in mind.
Well, that's good non-advice.
Yeah, that's right. It's about as vague of an answer as I could provide for the relatively vague question. So maybe if John has some more facts, maybe more mechanical spacing and frequencies and whatnot, maybe we can answer a little bit more precisely. But that's about as best as I could do.
Well, I do want to call out that he described the situation as an RFI buffet.
Yes, it would be an RFI buffet for sure.
All right. So, John, if you have more information, please feel free to send it along. We will try to do better. But we did want to address the question, even if it was a non-answer. So, George, what do we have coming up next time?
Well, next week we have the next episode, we have the interview with Berggren, where we're going to talk about the antenna analyzer and all about his background and why he designed it and what it is and what it does and how it works.
Outstanding. As always, we love your feedback. Get in touch with us. You can reach me via email at jeremy@hamradio360.com or on Twitter at KF7IJZ.
And I'm George at hamradio360.com and on Twitter at KJ6VU.
I know we've been lax with the Q&A section, so please start sending those questions back in because we really do enjoy answering them, especially when we don't have answers to give.
So you can send in answers as well as questions. That's okay too.
Car Talk made an entire career of this for years.
Oh, by the way, the next question that we get, like this antenna question John sent in, we should have called him up and said, so John, tell me, what color is your radio? Thanks for listening. And remember, folks, you can save 5% on your next order from www.mcmelectronics.com by using the code radio5 at checkout. That's radio5 at mcmelectronics.com. 73.